Welcome back to the weekly Xbox Indies, your source for Xbox indie game reviews.
Yay!
Nuclear Wasteland is a surprisingly good first-person shooter, taking inspirations from games like Halo's Firefight and Gears of War's Horde mode. You're trapped in an arena with waves of mutants coming after you. To help you fight back the ever-progressing waves of mutants, buildings will unlock after each wave to give you a slight edge. Some buildings hold health, others ammo to replenish, but the most cherished ones are the towers that give you new weaponry. And while your standard pistol has unlimited ammo, the more powerful guns you pick up need to be replenished frequently. The game's best balance actually comes from the time between waves of mutants. You have just enough time to refill your health, replenish your ammo, or find a new weapon, but only enough time for one of those. It forces you to plan out and prioritize your in-between wave actions, adding some depth to what could have easily become a more simplistic derivative shooter. The graphics are even incredibly detailed, with the gun models really standing out, especially when you consider that this is crammed into a game under 50 megabytes to fit into the $1 price bracket. I will say that there is one downside to the game though, and that is because the game did freeze my 360 twice while trying to quit. Luckily this only happened when I was quitting, so it didn't impact the gameplay at all, but generally it's not a good thing when a game freezes your system.
Eh?
A Shooter is a space shoot-'em-up that has some interesting ideas that I'm not sure panned out as planned. On paper, the game sounds like it could be a great game. For example, the enemies always aim at your ship rather than firing in predetermined patterns. Ideally, this would create a new experience every time you play, so it has infinite replay value, right? Unfortunately, in my experience, there's more of a tendency for there to be situations where it would be impossible to dodge all of the bullets. Sure, you have 3 bombs in each level that clear all enemy fire from the screen, but there's no way to get more bombs, so you're kinda screwed if you get stuck in more than 3 of these no-win scenarios per level. In each level there's also only one power-up, hiding in a purple asteroid. Again, this would ideally keep the difficulty curve of the game steadily progressing, but the purple asteroid is an absolute bullet sponge in the early levels, and if you miss even one power-up, you'll be greatly underpowered for the later levels. Even if you're collecting all of the power-ups, most of the enemies seem to be bullet sponges as well, so I constantly felt ill-equipped whenever new enemy types were added. I have no problems with the game being difficult, but there were times when A Shooter felt challenging to the point of being unfair. On the other hand, maybe I was just trying to play A Shooter the wrong way. The game's own help screen describes it as more of a survival shooter, and sure enough, when I focused entirely on dodging rather than shooting, I managed to make it through 5 levels completely unscathed, and even ranked in the game's surprisingly high-scoring leaderboards. It comes down to which you think is more fun, blasting enemies or precision dodging. Personally, I'm more of a fan of shooting in shoot-'em-ups, but if you think dodging bullets is just as fun, then A Shooter is the game for you. HakoSekai is a completely unique game for the 360. You start in a completely blank world, and must trap monsters called noise to bring the world to life. Each noise has a different behavior pattern, and you need to use those patterns to your advantage to lure them into your traps. You can press the A, B, X, or Y button to activate a trap, with that area of the world filling with color once the noise is trapped. The color of the world will depend on which button you press to activate the trap, and you are scored based on the pattern of colors you create in the world. There's a time limit that is constantly ticking away, and also drops whenever a noise touches you, but can be partially refilled by trapping noise. Unfortunately, the game isn't very clear about what a high-scoring world layout would be compared to a low-scoring one, which is the main thing that keeps HakoSekai in the A category rather than a yay. However, through experimenting I have found that you can alter the color of a square depending on the color of squares around it, and it's that sort of experimentation that I have found most enjoyable about HakoSekai. Starchon is a space shooter that has a lot in common with the recently reviewed Abaddon Retribution from a few weeks ago, so I apologize in advance for the inevitable comparisons I'll make between the two games. Both games are space shooters, where the focus of the game is around protecting a larger ship from alien attackers. Starchon comes out on top in terms of raw content, with over 80 short missions, 5 playable ships, and tons of customization options for each ship. However, in terms of playability, I find Abaddon the better choice. The controls in Starchon feel more floaty than they probably should, and the different ships don't really control that differently, so once you unlock the next ship, there's little incentive to use anything else. The biggest difference between the two games is how the larger ship is treated. In Abaddon, you could upgrade the ship's weapons as well, adding another layer of depth to the gameplay. However, in Starchon, it's purely an escort mission, which more often made me resent the presence of that larger ship than think of it as an integral part of the gameplay. I know it's not completely fair to base the whole review on comparing the two games, but the similarities are too uncanny not to. In the end, Starchon is a great space shooter that just came out a few weeks too late. Break the Invaders combines the classics Breakout and Space Invaders in a way that, quite frankly, I'm surprised doesn't happen more often. At first, the combination excited me. It's the common concept of two great tastes that taste great together. However, once I actually started playing, there were two elements that rubbed me the wrong way. First, the aliens use tiny hitboxes to determine whether you actually hit them or not, which was frustrating when the ball would pass right through the corner of an alien sprite to no effect. But this issue is easy enough to adjust your playstyle around after sticking with the game for a while. The more troubling issue is how you can only bounce the ball at an angle when the paddle is moving. If the paddle isn't moving at all, then the ball will always just bounce straight up. This makes it far too easy for the ball to get stuck bouncing at one side of the screen, bringing the game's pacing to a screeching halt. It's too bad because there's a great combo system in place for destroying aliens, and it's an otherwise really solid game. The soundtrack especially stands out if you're a fan of chiptune music, and I would buy that on its own. Unfortunately though, a few odd control choices managed to take away from the experience.
Nay.
The only thing funny about Funny Mini Golf is how broken the game is. Just the fact that it's almost impossible to figure out where you're aiming the ball should automatically put this game in the avoid at all costs pile. But then you pile on broken ball physics, poorly designed course layouts, and cheap hazards, and it's amazing just how successfully the developer has managed to sap all fun out of miniature golf. Can you say misogyny? The angel Aurelia can't, because that's a big word, and women are dumb. Isn't that hilarious? No, not really. But that's the mentality that the developer seems to have taken when trying to put humor into his game. But even if the game's dialogue wasn't a constant stream of female objectification, the gameplay doesn't hold up either. Walking is painfully slow, and there are times when pressing the jump button just plain doesn't work. With boring and sometimes broken gameplay, story and humor are really all the game could have going for it, and in that regard it falls so painfully flat that it's embarrassing, if not downright offensive.